At 7:30 a.m. on May 8, 1942, Second Lieutenant Stanley Watasa, strapped to his Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber on the flight deck of the USS Yorktown, watches as radar operators track approaching Japanese aircraft 70M northwest. 27 years, 5 months combat flights. Not a single aircraft shot down in the air. The Japanese launched 69 aircraft from the aircraft carriers Shokaku and Zeikaku. 18 of them were Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters, the deadliest carrier-based aircraft in the world. Watasa planned to fight them in a dive bomber. The SPD Dauntless was never intended for dogfighting. It weighed nearly 11,000 pounds, 4.7 tons fully loaded. Its top speed was 250 miles per HR 400 km/h, can reach 334. In a turning fight, a Japanese fighter could complete a full circle in less than 6 seconds. It took the Fearless twice as long. The American pilots came up with a name for what Watasa was about to try. They called it suicide. But the USS Yorktown had a problem: the aircraft carrier launched its strike group against the Japanese fleet the day before. 53 dive bombers and 22 torpedo bombers attacked and sank a light aircraft carrier. Watasa himself dropped a 1,000-pound bomb through its flight deck. Now these planes needed to get back on board, refuel and rearm. The Yorktown was vulnerable. Fighter cover was virtually non-existent. The carrier had only 18 F-4F Wildcats, 9 of which were already airborne, while on combat air patrol, the remaining 9 were in reserve. There simply weren't enough fighters to intercept them. Of the impending Japanese attack, Captain Frederick Sherman of the USS Lexington came up with a desperate solution. He ordered SBD dive bombers were supposed to patrol anti-torpedo aircraft. The theory was simple. The Fearless was armed with 2 forward-firing .50 caliber machine guns and 1 or 2.30 caliber machine guns, caliber cannons in the rear cockpit. If Japanese torpedo bombers try to attack at low altitude, the SBDs will be able to dive from above. Dive bombers were supposed to become improvised interceptors. This theory was never tested in combat. At 7:30 a.m. that same day, Yorktown launched 8 Dauntless SBDs from Reconnaissance Squadron 5. Watasa led a squadron of 4A section of aircraft. They were ordered to fly at low altitude, watch for torpedo bombers and shoot them down before they could release their weapons. No one mentioned what would happen if none of the fighters discovered them first. The mathematics of carrier aviation in 1942 was brutal. Japanese pilots where the training lasted for years. Many had combat experience over China. Their aircraft were specially built for the Pacific, exceptional range and maneuverability. American carrier pilots learned by doing previously developed aircraft. Everyone understood what carrier warfare would actually require. The loss ratio spoke for itself. In the first 6 months during the war, 0 fighters achieved a 12-to-1 superiority over Allied aircraft. For every 0 shot down, 12 American, British, Dutch, or Australian aircraft were shot down, fell from the sky. The 5th Reconnaissance Squadron had already lost aircraft during the operation in the Coral Sea. On May 4, during the attacks on Tulagi Harbor, Japanese floatplanes clashed with American dive bombers. On May 7, anti-aircraft fire during the attack on Sho, several SBDs were lost. The squadron was reduced to 17 combat aircraft out of the original 18. Watasa knew how strong the odds were. His dive bomber was 60 miles per HR slower than the 0. It couldn't climb as quickly, couldn't turn that sharp, couldn't dive that steep, in every measured category except one. The Japanese fighter was excellent. The exception was its firepower, 2.50 caliber SBD cannons. The machine guns fired heavier shells than the 27.7mm 0 machine guns. And Japanese fighters had a serious weakness that American intelligence was only just beginning to recognize. The 0 had no armor, lack of self-sealing fuel tanks. One lucky shot could turn it into a fireball, but for this explosion to happen, it had to hit 0, aim, and hitting 0 meant holding on long enough to aim. If you want to see how Watasa's slow diving bomber, which went up against the fastest fighters in the Pacific, please click the like button. This helps us share more forgotten stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Watasa. At 10:55 Yorktown's radar detected an incoming Japanese strike at a range of 68 nautical miles. Fighter control officers sent 9 wildcat aircraft to intercept, but they positioned the fighters too low, expecting the torpedo bombers at the level of the wave crest. The Japanese were flying at 10,000 feet. The wildcats missed their target completely. 8 SBDs left, dauntless in orbit between the Japanese strike forces and the American carriers. 8 slow, heavy, unmaneuverable dive bombers against 180 Zero fighters, 33 dive bombers and 18 torpedo bombers. Watasa saw them first, a swarm of planes descending through scattered clouds to the northwest. He counted at least 50 silhouettes, 8 of which were breaking formation, turning straight towards his 4-plane section 8 Zeros against 4 dauntlesses. The Japanese pilots they thought it would be easy. They were about to find out that Stanley Watasa had discovered something about the SBD, fearlessness that wasn't taught in any textbook, something that would keep him alive for the next 15 minutes until the pilots around him perished. This event changed his life forever and earned him a medal, the same award most dive bomber pilots receive. Never received it. The Zeros opened fire from 800 yards. Watasa pushed the handle forward and dove straight at them. The standard response to a Zero attack was to run, dive for the deck, and use fearless. Wait to gain speed while descending. Try to reach the fleet's defensive anti-aircraft fire before the Japanese fighter caught you. Watasa did the opposite. He learned something during training that his commander, the officer, repeatedly emphasized. When a faster aircraft attacks from behind or above, the natural instinct is to turn away. A way to escape, but the lapel gives the attacker the perfect deflection. The target moves predictably. The bullets find their mark. The transition to the attack changes everything. When the pilot turns to face the approaching fighter, and the geometry becomes impossible, the attacker approaches at combined speeds 500 miles per HR or more. The angle is constantly changing. The target is no longer moving in a straight line, but in a spiral towards the gunner. The pilot has about 2 seconds to adjust his aim, fire, and escape before a collision becomes unavoidable. Most pilots aren't capable of such a shot. He jerked the handle sharply to the left and pulled back, forcing his fearless car to make a steep climb straight into the Zero. Leader path. The Japanese pilot expected easy pursuit. Instead, he found himself looking at the nose of an American dive bomber, which was growing in size on his windshield as it approached. Leaving no time to correct, the Zero broke away, jerking sharply upward and to the side to avoid collision. The Watasa survived the first pass. 7 more fighters circled, taking position. The next 60 seconds became a blur of intense maneuvering. Watasa repeated his tactics again and again. Each time, the Zero backing into him, he went on the attack. Each time, the Japanese pilot had to choose between a collision and acceleration. Away. Each time, geometry gave Watasa a few more seconds of life. The rear gunner kept up a steady stream of fire. 2.30 caliber machine guns streaked across the sky, forcing the attackers to stand still, to break off or risk being hit from an unexpected angle. The 2-man crew was fighting as a single unit. The pilot and gunner covered each other. The remaining SBDs perished. The problem with Watasa's tactics was that they only worked against 1 aircraft at a time. While he was turning into one attacking, another Zero could have opened a clean shot from a different angle. The Japanese pilots were experienced. They fought for China. They knew how to coordinate attacks on a single target. Within the first 5 minutes, 4 of the 8 dauntlesses, the pilots and gunners who had been flying in formation with Watasa a few minutes earlier, were killed. Now they were falling toward the Coral Sea, engulfed in burning debris. Some managed to jump out, others didn't. Watasa continued. The Zero's weakness became apparent as the battle continued. The Japanese fighter was fast and maneuverable, but its 20mm cannons had only 60 rounds per gun. Its 7.7mm machine guns were lightweight, designed to damage fabric, covered biplanes rather than the all-metal structures of American aircraft. The SBD Dauntless had armor behind the pilot's seat. It had self-sealing fuel tanks. It could withstand hits. He would destroy Zero, and Watasa would take the hits. Every time he turned to attack, his nose would level out for a moment. With Zero approaching, every time he pulled the trigger of his .50 double caliber of the guns, the bursts were short, measured in fractions of a second. But the .50 caliber bullet was devastating. One hit the fuel tank, one hit the engine, one hit to the pilot. Any of these actions could have ended the battle instantly. The confirmed shoot-down occurred when the Zero entered too deep into the nose cone. The Japanese pilot continued on course. Too long trying to hit the American bomber .50, which as the calibers found it first. The Zero's engine exploded, spraying oil and coolant. The fighter flipped over and fell. The second Zero died in a similar manner. Another frontal impact. A pilot who believed his speed advantage would allow him to open fire and escape before the slow American bomber could answer. Another miscalculation. The third murder was different. Watasa and the Azeros were on a direct collision course. Neither pilot gave way. The closing velocity exceeded 500. At the last moment, both planes banked slightly to avoid a collision. Destruction, they passed within a few feet of each other. Some sources suggest that Watasa's wingtip actually clipped the Zero's wing, was torn off. The Japanese fighter spiraled into the sea. 3 victories over the most dangerous fighter in a dive bomber Pacific. But the battle is not over. The Japanese strike force is still on the approach. Torpedo bombers were preparing their attacks on Yorktown and Lexington, and half of the SBD anti-submarine aircraft, the torpedo patrol, was destroyed. Watasa turned his battered Dauntless toward the fleet. His planes set course hits. The ammunition was running low, but the torpedo bombers were still approaching, flying low and fast towards American aircraft carriers. He accelerated and dived towards them. The Japanese torpedo bombers were Nakajima B-5N Type 97 aircraft. American pilots called them Kates. They were faster than the Dauntless, which can reach 235 miles per hour in level flight. They carry the Type 91 aerial torpedo. A weapon that has already sunk or damaged dozens Allied warships began approaching the Lexington on the 7th of December. 14 Kate-class ships were approaching. 4 more were targeting the Yorktown. They flew at wave crest height, barely touching the surface of the Coral Sea at an altitude of 50 feet. At this altitude, anti-aircraft, the guns had difficulty tracking them. Calm water and a direct approach were required for proper torpedo preparation. The Watasa dived down on them from above. The anti-torpedo patrol had been designed for precisely this moment. The SBDs were carried sufficient firepower to damage or destroy a torpedo bomber before it can fire its weapons. The speed of a dive bomber, the disadvantage disappeared when attacking from above. Gravity provided acceleration that the engines couldn't achieve. He matched him, but the Keiths were faster. The report on the battle with the Yorktown later noted that the SBDs tried to intercept enemy torpedo bombers, but they were too fast for them. The torpedo bombers were already on their final approach. The dive bombers reached attack position. Watasa opened fire on the Kates as they raced past towards the aircraft carriers. His .50 caliber guns fired at one plane. He saw the shrapnel flying from the fuselage, but the Kate continued to fly. The Japanese pilots were ready for attacks. They would either fire the torpedoes or die trying. Most of them did both. At 11:20 this morning, 2 torpedoes hit the port side of the aircraft carrier USS Lexington. The massive carrier she shook from the impacts. Flooding immediately began in the boiler rooms, but the Lady Lex remained afloat. Her damage, the control teams were among the best in the Navy. They contained the flooding and restored engine operation within 30 minutes. The aircraft carrier Yorktown fared better. Its captain, Elliot Buckmaster, maneuvered aircraft carrier through a forest of torpedo trails. Japanese pilots launched 11 torpedoes at Yorktown. Each of them he missed, but the dive bombers found her, while Watasa and the surviving SBD's 33 Tichy D3 aval dive bombers entered the battle with low-flying torpedo bombers, with screams from 18,000 feet. The Yorktown's combat air patrol was still not in position. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, filling the sky with black flashes. 7. The valves dropped before reaching their release points. 26 continued their dive. At 11:27 a.m., a 500-pound bomb the flight deck of the aircraft carrier Yorktown was struck by an explosion. The blast traveled 3 decks before detonating in the air intake compartment. A fire broke out throughout the ship. The explosion killed 66 people. Another sailor later died of his wounds. Watasa was still in the air when the bomb fell. His fearlessness prevailed. Significant damage during the Zero battle. Bullet holes littered the fuselage and wings. Its ammunition the strength was almost exhausted. The plane was difficult to control, probably due to damage to the control surfaces, but the engine he was still flying. The plane was still flying. He led the SBD back toward Yorktown. Below him, chaos reigned. Lexington was burning, black smoke billowing out. The chimney, the Yorktown, was also smoking, but the fires on it seemed weaker. Destroyers and the cruisers circled the carriers, continuing to fire at the retreating Japanese aircraft. They landed on Yorktown in around midday. Ground crews assessed the damage to his plane. Dozens of holes, broken windows, a damaged control system, cables. It is amazing that the Dauntless remained airworthy. The results of the battle became clear in the following hours. The American strike on the Shikaku caused serious damage. 3 bomb hits destroyed her aircraft deck. She spent several months under repair at Kurai Naval Arsenal. Her aircraft were diverted to Zuikaku, but both carriers retreated north. American losses were even greater. The destroyer Lexington appears to have survived a torpedo hit. Hits, but at 12:47 internal explosions began to shake the ship. Gasoline vapors from damaged fuel lines accumulated in the lower compartments. Sparks from the electrical systems ignited them. Explosions continued throughout the day. At 5 p.m., the captain Frederick Sherman gave the order to abandon ship. Destroyers approached to rescue the crew. By 7:32 p.m., the Lexington sank in the Coral Sea, taking the lives of 216 people. The Battle of the Coral Sea ended. Both sides lost an aircraft carrier. Both sides claimed victory. In Tokyo, newspapers celebrated the destruction of American naval power. In Washington, the admiral studied the results and discovered reasons for cautious optimism. In the control room of the aircraft carrier Yorktown, Junior Lieutenant Stanley Watasa sat with other surviving pilots of Reconnaissance Squadron 5-4. Of the 8 SBDs launched on anti-torpedo patrols, he returned. Half the patrol had left, but Watasa shot down 3 Zeros in a dive bomber. Word spread. Group A reconnaissance squadron pilot fought Japanese fighters in a plane that was supposed to be he used tactics, not described in any manual. He survived a battle that should have been fatal. A few days later, orders came in. Watasa was being transferred to the fighters. The Navy was desperate for fighter pilots. 5 months after Pearl Harbor, American carrier-based aircraft suffered devastating losses. The 7th of December attack destroyed or damaged dozens of planes on the ground. The aircraft carrier Saratoga was torpedoed by a Japanese submarine in January, costing months of repairs. Lexington now lay at the bottom of the Coral Sea. Yorktown barely made it to Pearl Harbor. The bomb damaged the flight deck. Only 3 aircraft carriers remained in service in the Pacific: Enterprise, Hornet, and the damaged Yorktown, undergoing emergency repairs that would take 72 hours instead of the expected 90 days. The Battle of Midway was approaching. The Navy couldn't afford to waste pilots who had proven their effectiveness in combat. Watasa, at the end of May 1942, he received a transfer order. He was assigned to the 10th Fighting Squadron, a newly formed unit based at Naval Air Station San Diego. The squadron flew Grumman F-4F Wildcats, the same short fighters that they fought zero-sum bombing raids throughout the Pacific Ocean. Their commander was Lieutenant Commander James Henry Flatley Jr. Flatley was already a legend in naval aviation. He fought in the Coral Sea as a senior officer, 42nd Fighter Squadron aboard the Lexington. He engaged a Zero and survived. More importantly, by studying the Japanese fighter, we developed tactics that gave Wildcat pilots a fighting chance. Conventional wisdom in May 1942, he believed that the Zero was simply better, faster, more it is maneuverable, and climbs better. American pilots who attempted to engage the Zero in aerial combat were killed. The standard advice was to refuse to participate completely. He rejected the idea outright. He understood that the Zero had weak points that American pilots could exploit. The Japanese fighter lacked armor protection. A single salvo, the Wildcat 650 caliber machine guns could destroy it. The Zero's lightweight construction made it fragile. When diving at high speed, at speeds above 350 miles per hour, the controls became stiff, the ailerons became sluggish. A wild full-throttle dive could have avoided a Zero that couldn't have followed. A flatly designed training session programs that emphasized these advantages. His pilots practiced dive attacks. They learned to fight in pairs. Each wingman covered the other's blind spots. They learned to manage energy, trading altitude for speed, for he named his squadron the Reapers. Watasa arrived in San Diego in June 1942. His reputation, he was preceded by a pilot who shot down 3 Zeros in a dive bomber. A man who, instead of attacking, runs. He recognized talent the moment he saw it. But Watasa wasn't going to simply adopt Flatley's tactics. He challenged them. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch developed the famous defensive maneuver called the beam. Defense, later known as Thatch. The two planes were flying on parallel courses. When Zero attacked one, who turned to face his partner. The partner turned to face the attacker. Zero found himself trapped between two Wildcats, each holding a weapon aimed at their flank. They examined the straw wave and found it insufficient. The maneuver was defensive. It saved the pilots' lives but didn't destroy the enemy. He advocated more aggressive actions tactics, diving attacks from above, rapid dashes through enemy lines, powerful strike, breakaway, return to base height, attack again. He listened attentively, he incorporated Watasa's ideas into squadron training. The Reapers became one of the most aggressive fighter units in the Pacific Fleet. In September 1942, the 10th Fighting Squadron was ready for combat. Strategic, the situation in the Pacific Ocean changed dramatically after the events in the Coral Sea. In June, 4 ships were destroyed in the Battle of Midway. Aircraft carriers of the Japanese Navy, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Imperial Japanese Navy, lost their best pilots, their most experienced deck crews, their irreplaceable aircraft. American troops in August, they landed on the Guadalcanal, captured Henderson Field, and established a foothold in the Solomon Islands. But the Japanese were not defeated. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto assembled a massive fleet to recapture Guadalcanal. 4 aircraft carriers, 4 battleships, 14 cruisers, 44 destroyers. Thousands of Japanese soldiers prepared to land and crush the Marines defending Henderson Field. The Americans responded desperately. Improvisation. The Enterprise returned from repairs. The Hornet was operational. The battleship South Dakota provided air defense. Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid commanded the task force. 61 with orders to stop the Japanese advance. 10th Fighting Squadron, Grim, the Reapers arrived aboard the Enterprise in early October. Watasa was now a full member lieutenant. He served as the squadron's operations officer, 3rd in rank after Flatley and senior officer. he had switched completely from dive bombers to fighters. The days when he flew slow, the heavy, fearless ended. On the 25th of October 1942, a Pabi Catalina patrol the plane spotted Japanese carrier, forces 360 miles northwest of Santa Cruz Islands. 4 aircraft carriers, dozens of escort ships, hundreds of aircraft. The enemy was approaching. That evening, Admiral William Holly sent a message to Task Force 61, 2 words that defined next 24 hours: attack. Repeat, attack. Vitas sat in the waiting room, the Enterprise studies, reconnaissance photographs of Japanese aircraft carriers. The Shoku and Zuikaku, the same ships, were among them. He fought in the Coral Sea. They hunted each other for 6 months. Tomorrow, one of them will die. Before the battle nearly ended in disaster, the 25th of October, Pabi Catalina reported Japanese carrier forces 355 miles northwest of Task Force 61. Admiral Kincaid had a decision to make. The enemy was at the very edge of carrier air range. The strike had been launched. Could have immediately caught the Japanese before they could get their own planes into the air. But the returning pilots, they had to land in the dark, a dangerous business on the heaving deck of an aircraft carrier. Kincaid gave the order to strike. Hornet, the air group, was designated the main strike force. Enterprise was to act as a standby carrier carrying fighters on board to protect the task force. This was standard doctrine. 1 carrier attacks, 1 carrier defends. Then Kincaid changes its mind. At 14:25, it ordered the Enterprise to launch 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers on a search mission to pinpoint the exact location Japanese fleet. 30 minutes later, he ordered the rest of the Enterprise's air group to follow him. Fighters, torpedo bombers, airplanes, and all that. Watasa was incredulous. Search vectors assigned the Enterprise pilots were pointing away from the last known Japanese position. They were flying into a deserted ocean. Worse, the launch time meant they'd have to return after sunset, spotting the carrier at night in radio silence. Running out of fuel was practically impossible. The pilots of the 10th Fighter Squadron protests were passed up the chain of command. The orders made no tactical sense. The Enterprise was depriving itself aircraft while the Japanese fleet was within range. If enemy reconnaissance aircraft spotted the American carriers, there will be no fighters capable of protecting them. The order remained in effect. Watasa went with the rest of the Grim Reapers to around 3 p.m. They flew for hours in their assigned search directions, but found nothing but an empty sea and scattered clouds. As the sun sank toward the horizon, the fuel gauges began to show the ugly truth. Some planes there wasn't enough strength to reach the designated extraction point. At dusk, the Enterprise Air Group turned back. A possible point, a calculated position, where their aircraft carrier should be waiting. The Enterprise was not there. Kincaid had the task force maneuvered throughout the day, responding to submarine contacts and course changes. Aircraft carrier, she was now several miles from where the pilots expected to find her. Radio silence hampered communication. The air group was scattered across hundreds of square miles of darkening ocean, searching for a ship that had moved. The pilots they were running low on fuel. Some ditched, hoping the destroyers would find them before the sharks. Others circled, watching desperately as their instruments dropped to zero. Watasa recalled something from the morning's air combat. Patrol, the Enterprise had an oil leak. A thin slick was trailing behind the carrier, visible on the surface of the sea. In the fading light of day, he descended and began to search for this spot. He found following the oil trail through the darkness. Watasa found the Enterprise, and he led the other planes back to the carrier. Deck crews worked in a hurry, raising the planes in the conditions. It would have been too dangerous for daytime flights. Some pilots crashed on landing, others ran out of fuel in the landing zone and splashed down next to the ship. By midnight, the group was rescued with difficulty. Watasa saved the planes and pilots thanks to their quick reactions and observation. But the experience left him shaken. Admiral Kincaid's orders nearly destroyed the Enterprise Air Group. Even before the battle began, if the Japanese had attacked at dawn, the American pilots would have been exhausted. There the planes were damaged, their confidence shaken. The Japanese attacked at dawn. At 6:45 a.m. on the 26th of October, both sides launched search aircraft. At 7:40, a Japanese reconnaissance aircraft reported the Americans' aircraft carriers. At 7:50 a.m., the Enterprise's radar detected an approaching aircraft. Minutes later, American scouts discovered the Japanese fleet. Both sides launched a powerful attack simultaneously. Mathematics carrier warfare meant that both fleets would attack each other simultaneously. Japanese planes would arrive over the American carriers, while the American planes were over the Japanese carriers. Defense would depend entirely on combat patrol fighters and anti-aircraft guns. Combat Squadron 10-8 Wildcats were in the air on combat air patrol. Watasa was among them. At 8:22 a.m., radar operators on the Enterprise reported a large cluster approaching. From the northwest, more than 60 aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers. The full force of the Japanese carrier fleet was approaching. Watasa checked his ammunition. Full loading. He checked the fuel supply. There was enough for 40 minutes of combat. He inspected the horizon to the northwest. The sky was filling with enemy aircraft. First, a wave hit the aircraft carrier Hornet. 27 aircraft from the aircraft carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku landed on American task force at 8:50 a.m. 15 AHED-3, Aval dive bombers. 12 Nakajima aircraft, B-5N Kate torpedo bombers. Fighter cover was overhead. It is about time. He was part of a combat air patrol assigned to protect both carriers, but fighter control was chaotic. Radio the channels were clogged with overlapping transmissions. Radar operators had difficulty tracking multiple approaching formations. From different heights and directions, 8 Wildcats of the 10th Fighter Squadron scattered across the sky. Each the pilot struggled desperately. Watasa noticed 2 valves beginning the Hornet's dive from 18,000 feet. He pushed the throttle forward and flew toward them. The Pratt Whitney Wildcat's engines firing at full power, seeking altitude. The valves were already in a nosedive. Thundering downward at nearly 300 miles per HRC created a distinctive whistling sound that gave them such fame. Watasa intercepted them at 12,000 feet. His first burst hit the engine cowling. Japanese dive bomber, it staggered, leaving a trail of smoke behind it. The pilot tried to continue the attack, but the plane was losing consciousness. It slowly rolled to the left and fell, splashing into the ocean without dropping the bomb. The second Val had already flown past him, diving towards Hornet. Watasa flipped and passed, turning. He took the direction, but the angle was wrong. The Japanese pilot was too far ahead, too carried away in his dive. Watasa fired a long burst at extreme range. He saw sparks from the impacts on the fuselage. The whirlwind continued to fall. At 8:54 a.m., a .250 kg bomb hit the Hornet's flight deck near the island structure. The explosion instantly killed 7 people. Fires engulfed the entire deck. Within seconds, the burning shaft, perhaps the one that damaged Watasa, crashed right into the aircraft carrier's strut. Aviation gasoline splashed across the signal bridge. More fires. 2 torpedoes. Within 3 minutes, the aircraft carrier crashed into the starboard side of the USS Hornet, causing the carrier to lose control. Having perished in the water, she became a stationary target. New bombs found her. By 9:15 a.m., the Hornet was ablaze from stem to stern. Watasa didn't have time. Stay tuned. Next up was the Enterprise. The second wave appeared on radar at 9:30 a.m. The formation was larger, 44 aircraft, and 20 Kate torpedo bombers led the attack. The bombers fly low and fast toward the surviving American aircraft carrier, the Enterprise. She was the last operational aircraft carrier in the Pacific. Had she sunk, the Guadalcanal campaign would have been a failure. Henderson the field will fall. The strategic initiative will completely shift to Japan. Everything depends on whether we can stop it. Those torpedo bombers, Bakassar, dove toward them. The Keiths were approaching from different directions, a coordinated attack. An attack aimed at suppressing the carrier's maneuverability. Turn to avoid the torpedoes of one group and you. They were the perfect target for another. The only defense was to destroy the attackers before they could release their weapons. Watasa selected a group of 11 Kates that were coming from the Enterprise's port side. He attacked them from the side, above and behind, using the altitude to gain speed. His 650 caliber machine guns, they opened fire from 400 yards. The first Kate exploded. The formation scattered. The Japanese pilots scattered in different directions, trying to escape the American fighter that appeared in the middle of them. 3 Kates immediately dropped their torpedoes, and the weapons fell uselessly into the sea. The carefully planned attack was falling apart. Watasa stayed with them. He shot down the second Kate, then the third one, his wildcat, was fired upon by Japanese stern gunners, but the bullets were unable to stop it. The fourth Keith went down, then the fifth. 5 torpedo bombers were destroyed in about 4 minutes. In combination with the 2 VAL aircraft shot down earlier in this battle, Watasa shot down 7 Japanese aircraft in one sortie. No American pilot ever achieved this result in one battle. Not at Pearl Harbor, not at Midway, not in the Coral Sea. The Enterprise barely survived 2 bombs. During the battle, the aircraft carrier came under attack. 3 near misses caused additional damage, but the torpedo attack was successful. A coordinated attack that was supposed to sink it failed under fire from the Vasa. Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Flatley watched the battle from his cockpit. He immediately understood what had happened. His pilot saved the aircraft carrier. Its pilot may have saved the entire Guadalcanal campaign. That evening, Flatley wrote in Watasa's logbook 7 words that would haunt the pilot for the rest of his life. The greatest duel, a record in history. Then Flatley did something unusual for a squadron commander who rarely presented awards. He began preparing a Medal of Honor nomination. The Medal of Honor nomination went through the chain. The command has documented everything categorically. 7 confirmed victories, broken the torpedo attack, the rescue of the Enterprise. He compared Watasa's achievement to that of Lieutenant Edward O'Hare's famous action in February when he shot down 5 Japanese bombers attacking the USS Lexington. For this feat, Watasa received the Medal of Honor. Watasa shot down 7 aircraft, 2 more than O'Hare. The circumstances are equally desperate. The proposal was put forward by Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid, commander of Task Force 61. Kincaid was in trouble. The Battle of Santa Cruz was technically an American defeat. The Hornet was sunk. Japanese destroyers, after her own escorts, failed to sink her. Enterprise survived, but was badly damaged. Her forward elevator was jammed in the up position, and her flight deck was scarred by bomb hits. American carrier forces with only 1 combat-ready ship left in the Pacific Ocean. Questions arose about Kincaid's decisions. The disastrous search operation of the 25th of October that nearly destroyed the Enterprise air group before the battle. The combat air patrol arrangement allowed Japanese strikes to reach the carriers with minimal interception. Inability to effectively coordinate fighter operations. Kincaid needed the Santa Cruz story to focus on Japanese losses, not American mistakes. A Medal of Honor would have attracted attention. Journalists will investigate. Questions will arise about why such heroism was necessary. Why 8 wildcats protecting 2 carriers from 60 aircraft? Why was fighter control so chaotic? Why was the air group scattered across the empty ocean the night before the battle? Kincaid downgraded the nomination. Instead of a medal, Watasa was awarded his 3rd Navy Cross. The award recognized his exceptional heroism and indomitable perseverance fighting spirit. 7 aircraft were credited with destruction. The Medal of Honor was not mentioned. The recommendation presented by Flatley stunned the pilots of the 10th Fighter Squadron. Hal Buell, the dive bomber pilot who flew with Watasa in the Coral Sea, later wrote that Watasa deserved the Medal of Honor for his Coral Sea flight alone, not to mention his feat in Santa Cruz. The other pilots agreed. Downgrading became a source of quiet bitterness within the air group. Watasa said nothing publicly. He accepted an offer of assignment to the Navy, crossing and continuing the flight. Santa Cruz's strategic importance became clear in the following weeks. The Japanese won a tactical victory. They sank the Hornet and damaged the Enterprise, but they lost 99 aircraft and dozens of irreplaceable pilots. The pilots who attacked Pearl Harbor sank the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, which destroyed Allied aircraft. Power across the Pacific faded faster than Japan could prepare replacements. The Enterprise returned. Maintenance lasted several weeks. Repair crews worked around the clock in Numa, repairing bomb damage and restoring it. By mid-November, she was back in action. The only American the aircraft carrier defended Guadalcanal during the decisive naval battles that decided the outcome of the campaign. Japanese aircraft carriers never recovered from Santa Cruz. Shukaku and Zuikaku lost so many planes and pilots that they could not conduct offensive operations for months. The light aircraft carriers Juno and Hio did not have trained pilots filled the gap. As American forces advanced toward the Solomon Islands in 1943, Japanese naval forces the Air Force was a mere shadow of its former might. Watasa's military operations were over in early 1943. He was transferred to the United States to train new fighter pilots at a naval airbase Atlantic City. The skills he mastered, the tactics he developed, the instincts that helped him survive. Having survived 2 carrier battles, he was now being passed on to the next generation of naval aviators. His final combat scored 10 confirmed aerial victories and a quarter 3-0s in Coral, the C-7 planes in Santa Cruz, a common victory at the beginning of the war. By the standards of the Pacific Air War, he was twice an ace. He never flew back in action. The war continued without him. New aircraft carriers joined the fleet. Essex, Yorktown, Lexington, names revived from the names of ships that were sunk. New fighters arrived, F-6F Hellcat, F-4U Corsair. Aircraft Watasa observed the planes from the training squadrons as pilots. Having received the order, they led these new planes into battle. The desperate days in the Coral Sea and Santa Cruz faded from memory. Now the fleet was winning. The question was no longer one of survival, but of victory. But for Stanley Watasa had another chapter to write. A career that would span 3 decades, teams that transfer him from training squadrons to aircraft carriers, and a question that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Life? Why did the Navy deny him the Medal of Honor? Stanley Watasa remained in the Navy. The war ended in August 1945, but Watasa's career was just beginning. He commanded fighter squadrons. He served as an aviation officer aboard the USS Essex during the Korean War, coordinating strikes on North Korean and Chinese positions. He attended the Naval War College. He steadily advanced through the ranks. In November 1962, Captain Stanley Watasa assumed command of the aircraft carrier USS Constellation. The irony was not lost on him. 20 years ago, he was the junior lieutenant had fought desperately to save the Enterprise from Japanese torpedo bombers. Now he commanded one of the most powerful warship ever built. Constellation was a supercarrier over 1,000 feet long, carrying 80 aircraft, capable of projecting American power anywhere in the world. Watasa commanded the Constellation for a year. He managed with the same precision and aggression that distinguished his flights. Officers who served under him recalled a captain who demanded excellence and led by example. The lessons of the Coral Sea and Santa Cruz shaped him. He understood that preparation and training were the difference between victory and disaster. He retired from the Navy, the 1st of July 1970, with the rank of captain, 32 years of service, 3 Navy Crosses, 2 Bronze Stars, the Legion of Honor, countless other awards, but not the Medal of Honor. The question came up again. Watasa made periodic appearances aboard the aircraft during his retirement. In 1987, he was inducted into the Carrier Aviation Hall of Fame, recognizing his place among the greatest naval aviators in American history. Journalists who interviewed him inevitably asked about Santa Cruz, about the 7 victories, about the medal that was never received. Watasa declined. He talked about his fellow pilots, about those who didn't return, about Jimmy Flatley, who they believed in him, trained him, and recommended him for the highest honor the nation could bestow. He died in 1958 as a vice admiral, never knowing that his Medal of Honor nomination had been quietly buried. In 2012, writer Ted Edwards began researching Watasa's life for a biography. He interviewed the aging he flew extensively, recording hours of conversations about the Coral Sea, Santa Cruz, and the decades that followed. Edwards documented the Medal of Honor controversy in detail. Tracing documents through the naval archives, the evidence was clear. Flatley submitted a recommendation. Kincaid downgraded it. The decision was made for reasons unrelated to Watasa's military actions. Edwards titled his book 7 in Santa Claus. Cruz Stanley Winfield. Watasa died on the 23rd of January 2013 at the age of 98. According to his wishes, he was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea. The ocean, which witnessed his death, the greatest triumphs brought him his last. The question of the Medal of Honor remains unresolved. Some military historians argue that the award can still be awarded posthumously. Congress has the power to extend the deadline limitations on Medal of Honor nominations. Presidents have occasionally approved such exceptions for World War II veterans whose heroism was forgotten or suppressed. But Stanley Watasa never asked for a review of the decision. He never lobbied for a medal. He publicly expressed dissatisfaction with Kincaid's decision. He simply lived his life, served his country, and let his past speak for yourself. This record speaks for itself. 3 Zeros shot down in a dive bomber 7 aircraft. Destroyed in 1 sortie. Aircraft carrier saved from destruction. Campaign saved everything. This was done by a pilot who was told his plane couldn't fly, who encountered difficulties that should have killed him, who refused. Accept the limitations imposed by others. SBD Dauntless, which Watasa, the Coral Sea flight, was never designed for dogfighting. The Navy sent him against a Zero in a plane 60 miles per HR slower than. He cut his maneuverability in half, expecting to die. Instead, he switched to attacking. Stanley Watas's lesson. It is simple. A weapon is less important than a warrior. An airplane is less important than a pilot. Courage and skill can overcome any difficulties if the person who owns them refuses to give up. If the story touched you as much as it touched us, so please do me a favor, click the like button. Everyone, 1 like is YouTube's signal to show this story to more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We save forgotten stories from Dusty. Archives every day, stories of dive bomber pilots who fought the Zeros, incredible odds, real people, real heroism. Leave a comment now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the US, UK, Canada, or Australia? The community spans the globe. You are not just a spectator. You are part of preserving these memories alive. Let us know where you are. Let us know if anyone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for making sure Stanley Watasa doesn't disappear into silence. These people deserve to be remembered, and you helped to do it.